Ooh, with the college football playoff second round set to begin. With the college football playoff second round bowls set and the teams selected and invitations accepted, the quarterfinals of the college football playoff are set to begin New Year's Eve and will continue on to New Year's Day. However, there is one matchup in the quarterfinal round that has everybody on the edge of their seats. Well, almost everyone, except for fans in the Southeastern Conference. Want to find out what matchup that is? Stay tuned to find out on Gridiron Gab Triple Option. Welcome back, Gabbers. Thank you all so much for joining us on this wonderful couple of days after Christmas. Of course, you're gabbing with your man, Mr. CeeLo. And hope you guys had an awesome Christmas. You spent a lot of time with family, and you guys got those little bickerings and your little Christmas wagers out the way, and still found a way to have a good time. But it is bittersweet for us today, you guys, as we get ready to continue on to our sports journey. As we lost a major piece of sports today. As a longtime great Greg Gumbel, if many of you haven't heard, he passed away of cancer just yesterday. As many of you who didn't know, Greg Gumbel was huge in paving the way for many other black announcers. He was the first to do a Super Bowl, and if you guys want to see what tribute I paid to him on my Carolina Panthers show, please go and check that out, as he called the Super Bowl, and I put some of those sound bites on the show. I couldn't find any college football bites, but he did do a lot of college basketball, was instrumental in getting that sport to the prominence that it enjoys today. He was battling cancer, and sadly, he left us at 78. So I would hope that you guys would join me in a salute for one of the great pioneers in broadcasting, and also someone who I consider a mentor, someone who showed me how to enjoy the game and also be passionate about it, but also be respectable. As I said, Greg Gumbel was 78. Mr. Gumbel, we salute you. Thank you guys for that moment. If you guys know of Greg Gumbel and you put him in the top 10 or one of the greatest, if you can put him as one of the greatest play-by-play announcers that we've ever seen, whether it's college basketball or professional football, please put a 1 down in the comments. Because he was one of my favorites. And he will be missed. And I'm sure he would be grateful if he could be calling this one. This one is truly going to be a fun one. I think it's probably going to be, and I've heard so many analysts say that this is going to be one of those games where anything can happen. And I am concurring with them. I think this is going to be one of those games where I will say that Kirby Smart being the kind of, I'm just going to say it, he's a crybaby. He's a crybaby, but I can't take away from what he is capable of doing. He's a very good coach. He probably consider one of the best if he'd stop that whining. But other than that, he understands what he needs to do. And I think he truly is going to be one of the wild cards in this, because he can either make this game or break this game for Notre Dame. He ultimately is going to have to figure out a way to keep his defense in check. And I was listening to a couple of guys that were talking about this game, and Georgia blitzes 50% of the time. But then they also run a lot of stunts 38% of the time. So that basically means, in a nutshell, when these guys aren't blitzing, they're stunning you. So it's hardly ever a situation where you're blocking the guy in front of you. That's a really difficult thing to deal with when you're Notre Dame and you've got so many instances where guys are just coming right at you as opposed to attempting to stunt you, which is really actually a good idea when you think about it, because if your defense is so accustomed to, hey, this guy's blitzing and they don't come, then you get to a point where you're saying, okay, nobody's coming and I'm standing here with nobody to block. Hey, let me turn to this guy. Meanwhile, you got a guy looping around, or you got a guy looping over, trying to find a way to get to the quarterback. And guess what? He finds a gap. And what happens? You got your quarterback on an island. Now, the only difference is the Bulldogs have really not played a quarterback with Riley Leonard's capability, unless you count the Yellow Jackets. Ultimately, what this is going to end up being, and I've said it before, you don't want to play in a situation where Georgia is being able to tee off on you. Now, I know I'm going in early and I'm starting to talk about this game, but the reality of it is, oh, by the way, Brad, thank you so much for the support. Brad basically said, in a nutshell, on my last show, if many of you know, I was teeing off on the comments of guys like Kirk Herbstreit, about them saying that they didn't belong or who belonged in there. This is a bunch of BS. And yeah, if you guys want to watch it, check it out. It's still on. It was a big piece, because right now we're seeing that the teams were in there should have been the teams that were in there. And no, I don't want to hear this mumbo jumbo about go back to 4. No, it's fine the way it is. Guess what? What's going to happen is you're going to start seeing more and more of these elite players stay away from the Georgias and stay away from the Alabamas. Sorry, Brad. But that's the reality. You're going to start seeing more parity in college football, because these other kids that are going in as freshmen, they're going to stop committing to these schools. They're going to start committing to the smaller schools, because as we saw, if I recall correctly, the quarterback that transferred out of Duke got an $8 million deal, I think it was. And I'm tired of hearing people say the NIL is ruining college football. No. If you're the one that is not benefiting, it's ruining college football. Now we're going to start to have parity. Live with it. It's a good thing. When you have parity in anything, it's a good thing. But anyway, back to my point. Ultimately, I believe that when we look at the way this Notre Dame offense is run, when you look at the way Georgia Tech played them, there was only a handful of times in that game where Georgia was able to impose its will defensively. And now this is going to sound really cliche, and a lot of people are going to go, yeah, well, whatever, duh. But when you get Georgia on its heels defensively, like Georgia Tech did, and you're calling the shots, and Georgia's defense is confused, that's when the good things start to happen, because you're able to do what you want. And I think ultimately, Denbrock is a guy that comes out of LSU, and I think a lot of people forget. They're thinking, okay, Notre Dame, moo-hoo-hoo. Marcus Freeman comes from Cincinnati. He played at Ohio State. Denbrock coached at LSU. He's been at Notre Dame before, but he comes over here. However, he's got a unique situation here with Riley Leonard. Now, I was listening to a couple of these podcasts, and you have some really good ones. I'm going to have to start doing better so you guys can check them out. I think it was the PFF podcast where they said that Riley Leonard was one of the top 5 quarterbacks against the blitz. So I will say this about Georgia. And I think he threw 7 touchdowns and no interceptions. So I think ultimately when you're looking at what you want to do, I think this would be a game if Georgia's going to win. If I'm Georgia, now I get it. There's a lot of teams that don't blitz the same type of athletes Georgia sends. I'm not saying Georgia should get away from its 50% blitz package. I'm not saying that, but my ratio, I would go from 38% looping to 50% looping, and then go to 38% in this game blitzing. That's what I would do, because I think ultimately Notre Dame's offensive line does struggle with this. You have the ability, and then drop back into coverage, because when Riley Leonard makes his mistakes, he makes most of his mistakes when teams are in zones. Because ultimately it has to do with him reading it and putting the ball in a spot, and also his receivers getting to those spots. So ultimately, when you're a Georgia fan and you look at what Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers were able to do, find those zones and sit down in them, ultimately they were not able to do that. So needless to say, that's where it was. So I think that's where I would go if I was Georgia, because their weakness is on the back end. Front seven, there's not a weakness there, unless you could say Georgia getting off big time blockers. Because as dominant as Tennessee's offensive line is, they haven't really faced a group of tackles, i.e. tackle to tackle skill set wise, as the Irish's front line. And that's scary considering how young this front is. And there is some talk that Notre Dame could get back its star tackle, Charles Jagasaw, and play in this game. So there's a possibility there. So not only does Kirby Smart have an advantage, but also Marcus Freeman does too. But we don't know what capacity he'll be available. But if I'm Kirby Smart, I'm flipping that line a lot. I'm looping those guys around like crazy. And instead of basically sending all-out blitzes. And Georgia plays a lot of zone, not necessarily a lot of man, but they will get up in your face and make it look like they're playing man when they're really playing a two-deep zone. So that would be really what I would see out of Georgia's defense if they really want to keep Notre Dame at bay, because needless to say, I'm sure Georgia's going to realize they're going to have to run blitz a lot. And Georgia's tackles and their guards are very good at getting to the second level. But Georgia also has one of the best tackle-to-tackle defenses in the country. You don't get, you average a yard, less than a yard before contact. And you already know Georgia's a very good tackling defense compared to what they faced at Indiana. You're not going to get very many 98-yarders against anybody, let alone against Georgia. But ultimately, the way I see this is Notre Dame is going to have to be able to do a lot of shifting, do a lot of motion, because Georgia's defense goes, those front seven guys, they go at the first thing they see. We saw that at Georgia Tech. They're going to have to be very disciplined, and they're not very disciplined when they see something break. When they see something, they attack. And Notre Dame's got to take full advantage of that aggression. They're going to have to do some chipping when they run the rollout plays. I think that's the best thing to get Georgia. Run a lot of play action off the edge. See what Georgia's giving you. And if they can get the edge with Riley Leonard, or they can streak maybe Bo Collins or possibly Eli Raridan down the side, that would be huge. Because one space that Georgia does not have to deal with, or did not have to deal with in any of their games, was a pass-catching tight end that would hurt you. They've dealt with some average tight ends, but not tight ends that can hurt you, like Eli Raridan and Mitchell Evans, these type of guys. And I think Notre Dame needs to go into the 14-player personnel. Georgia, on the other hand, is going to have to stay disciplined if this is the way Notre Dame goes. Notre Dame's chance at winning this game is going to be being able to get get Georgia one step out of position. I don't care how fast you are as a defense. You have to be able to stay on task. If you get one step out of position, any of you guys that know this game, one step in the NFL, a step and a half at the college level. That step can be the difference between whether you get the pylon or you don't. Riley Leonard is going to be the X factor. Now, if Notre Dame wants to take the Georgia Tech route, that could be a different thing. But I think Notre Dame is going to pull pieces out of the Georgia Tech playbook and ultimately mix things up. Now, people don't remember, Haynes King had over 100 yards rushing and over 300 passing. The reality of it is, I see him, he being Riley Leonard, as a much better quarterback, passer-wise and running-wise, because Haynes King's not nearly as fast. He is more tough. I will give him that. He is much a bigger body than Leonard. Their body size are about the same, but I look at Haynes King as much tougher because he has had to sustain injuries, whereas Riley Leonard has been really silent. And I don't know if Georgia is going to pay much attention to him, but this could be a game where Denbroke could actually turn this into a track fest that Georgia does not want. And I ultimately think that Notre Dame wants this to be a track fest here because this favors them, not Georgia, with Carson Beck being on the sideline, which leads me to Georgia's offense against Notre Dame's defense. Now, they've played some really good defenses. However, they haven't played a defense that's got a defensive safety like one Xavier Watts. A former Chuck Bednarik Award winner, had 5 interceptions before the playoff. He got an interception last week. Was very close to picking another one off in that same game. Gunnar Stockton had better watch himself. This is where, if I'm Mike Bobo, I'm remotely aware of where Xavier Watts is. Anything that Gunnar Stockton throws down the field, it better be something where the play is actually designed to get Xavier Watts out of place. I mean, they better not throw it down the field. If you're Georgia, you don't want to throw down the field if Xavier Watts is in place. The one thing Gunnar Stockton better be doing, and this is where his 50 pass attempts and his 2 interceptions come into play. He looked okay against Texas, but the one thing Georgia's going to have to do, and I remember hearing this on another podcast, Georgia's rushing total is ranked in the bottom third of the country. This is the lowest that Georgia's running game has been in over 35 years. The last year, you got to go all the way back to before he took possession. This was Mark Richt's year. I think it was 04, if they said correctly. Was it 04? 06? That was the last time Georgia had this few number of yards average per game. And the truth of the matter is, Georgia's going to need that running game. Now, are they capable of running the ball? Absolutely. We saw it against Texas. To me, now, they're much better pass blocking. I will say that. You got to look at the fact that you got Etienne, who's been big in both Texas games. And to me, it's one of those where it's just kind of like, well, we don't need Etienne. Let's sit him on the bench. And that's what it looked like. It looked like Etienne was brought in just for the big games. This has the opportunity to be another one. Another huge game where he can come in and he can dominate a football game. He has that capability. And I still think with Georgia's offensive line, now, do they get to the second level better than other teams? It remains to be seen. It could be a secret weapon of theirs. We don't know. But I can tell you right now, there have been moments where Etienne has been able to get loose. And the reality of it is, if I'm Georgia, and I'm patient with it, I'm not going to give Notre Dame a short field. Now, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to say Gunnar Stockton can sling it. He's a 5-star. Okay. But what about your receivers? This is the first time I can honestly say that you would have thought Georgia would have taken the approach of, I get it. You want Carson Beck to go first round. I get it. Everybody all saw the talent. I would have went more towards this is a running style offense. Well, and as bad as the receivers have been at times for Georgia, Beck was still able to throw for over 3,000. And as bad as Beck was at some points during the season, he still was as good as he was. Georgia fans gave this man a lot of heat because of how good he was last year. What you should have been doing was looking at how much separation guys like Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey were able to get. The guys you got right now, they're not getting the same type of separation. So it kind of leaves you a lot to be desired when you talk about what we're doing or what they're not able to do. As I said, the reality of it is Georgia does not have the luxury it's been having at the receiver and the tight end position. Now, I will admit, they do have a couple of playmakers. Not going to go out there and say that they don't. But they're going to have to hit it. But I think ultimately for Georgia to win this game, they're going to have to run the football. And I think they can. Because Notre Dame hasn't shown that they're the stoutiest up against the run, and they have lost their defensive tackle, arguably an All-American, but Riley Mills tore his ACL in the third quarter of that Indiana game. And he's a huge piece. And ultimately, when people say, oh, we're not playing without Carson, Georgia fans will say, we're not playing without Carson Beck. Well, we're not playing without Riley Mills, who is a huge part in that defense. And Notre Dame already has a small front. They're very quick, but they're very small. That's not a good recipe when you're talking about a big offensive line of the Georgia Bulldogs versus a lighter line in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They're going to have to get to the line of scrimmage. Now, as I said earlier, Georgia's tackles and guards are not really good at getting to the front. However, that could change, being that you got a lighter line to deal with. Lighter but quicker, but you also have to deal with the idea that they could seal these blocks up and secure these blocks a lot easier for their counterparts. And get to those second levels of Jack Kaiser. And ultimately, what Georgia wants to be able to do in this game is they ultimately want to be able to run play action pass and get Xavier Watts out of position, because the reality is you do not want Gunnar Stockton to stare down whoever he's going to throw it to, because Xavier Watts is one of the best ball hawks in the country. He's going to have to look Watts off. And it wouldn't shock me if Bobo called one of those quiet type games where it's just like dink here, dunk here, run, dink here, dunk here, run, and take his shots sparingly. Because ultimately, Georgia can control the clock. I think ultimately Georgia's going to want to control the clock and take their shots here and there. But it would not surprise me if Gunnar Stockton actually had a pretty good day, being that Mike Bobo has been here before. He's going to probably give Stockton a lot of easy throws without a lot to have to access. But it would not surprise me if they actually turned him loose on 2 or 3 plays and say, okay, he's comfortable. Let's give him something to look at. He won't do it often unless Stockton gets in a rhythm and he catches Notre Dame on their heels. But I ultimately see this game going at the turnover battle. We've seen Georgia's football team become more and more aggressive on the ball, which is something we had not seen much of during the regular season. I think this is going to be a game where Georgia knows they've got to go after turnovers, and it's going to be a situation of, does it cost them? Do the Bulldogs get caught going after the ball instead of making this tackle? Does it cost them? Because you can't do that against Jeremiah Love. You can't do that against Jadarian Price. You cannot do that against Riley Leonard and not succeed. They have gotten more aggressive with getting after the ball, but does it cost them? Ultimately, Brad already knows this is coming. Ultimately, I see my Irish pulling the upset, because I think ultimately I'm looking at that Georgia Tech game. Notre Dame's got 3 better positions than Tech did. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, Tech is a different game. Well, Notre Dame's a different animal. Now, ultimately, do I think Georgia puts a handle on Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love? I think so. The wild card is going to be, can Mike Denbrook be willing to run Riley Leonard at least 15, 20 times in this game? It's been a long time since Riley's toted the ball more than 15 times. I don't know if they're going to get back to that. I think Georgia ultimately is going to shut down running backs, but I think Riley Leonard's the difference. Do I think Gunnar Stockton plays a perfect game? Almost. I think this game goes down to the wire. I think he makes an important mistake later in this game, but he makes 2 or 3 important decisions that actually keep Georgia in the game. I think Trevor Etienne has another Texas-type performance, but I think ultimately it's going to be a game where Georgia gets in the red zone and they can't score, and I think Notre Dame gets in the red zone and they're able to score via the tight ends. I think ultimately it's going to be where Stockton's legs make a difference in some case, but it's not going to be enough. They're going to miss Carson Beck's ability to make decisions with the ball through the air. And for that reason, I like Notre Dame 27-24. It's not going to be a last-second kick. It's going to be an opportunity where Stockton has a chance to make a play on the last drive, and he turns it over. That's how I see this game going. It's going to be a rump pucker, a nail biter, a heart stopper, And I think it's going to be the best game of the weekend. Well, I think it'll be the best. It'll be the most exciting game of the weekend, but I think the best game of the weekend is going to be Ohio State and Oregon. Want to find out why that is? Tune in on the next show. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with my perception that Notre Dame is going to squeak one out on Georgia? Or do you think the other way around? I know you do, Brad. Also, put a comment down and make sure we give respect and love to the late Greg Gumbel. You know, not many sportscasters are going to come along like him. Got nothing but love for you, Mr. Greg. Also, make sure you go to the Facebook page at Gridiron Gab Triple Option. Let us know what you're thinking about. If there's other topics that we need to discuss, please let us know. If you want to talk about the transfer portal, put it down in the comments. As well, let me know if you want me to talk about your favorite team. I know what Brad wants. I'm coming with the show, Brad. I'm sorry. Also, go to my Instagram at Mr. CeeLo. Find out what other shows and things I'm going to be caught up in once the season is over. But until the next time, same Gab channel, same Gab platform.